Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining another monthly edition of AppGuard's subject matter webinar series. I'm just going to give everybody another couple minutes to get logged in. We've got a handful of people logged in right now. Just to give you a little bit of housekeeping. So we run these webinars once a month. We also run an additional webinar, which is more AppGuard centric and more of a technical general overview of how AppGuard operates within the enterprise and within the SMB market. That is not what the purpose or the intention of this webinar is. This webinar series is once a month. We get topics from people, from panelists on through to use cases, and people generally out there in the world want to be educated and learn about various examples within the cybersecurity world. So we've done a webinar series with Mark Kelton and Bob Bigman to discuss state nations. We've done one on hacktivism. We've done one on various types of attacks, and we've covered things like the Marriott Starwood breach, et cetera, et cetera. I'm very, very excited for this one. I think this is one of the most interesting topics that we've covered in the past several weeks, and I'm really grateful to have Fred and Peter here, who will introduce themselves in a second. A couple things for folks listening. We will have a question and answer period at the end. We're going to do about 30 minutes of content delivery, and then but feel free to chat your questions in if you can, or if not, we'll open up the lines a little bit further if we can as well at the end of the conversation. And if someone has a topic that they would like us to consider for a future webinar series, part of our webinar series, we'd be more than happy to hear that. So feel free to chat or email that to us as well. And then finally, if you're interested in potentially bringing that topic and being considered for a panelist on that topic, we'd love to hear that experience as well. So that said, Fred and Peter, may I ask you to introduce yourselves and over to you guys.
Yeah, this is Fred Mestre-Polito with Polito Incorporated. And just to get a little bit of background here, Polito Incorporated started 7 years ago. We do a lot of commercial work with financial institutions and also healthcare and other industries. Some of the things we like to do are the technical challenges, like testing ATM machines or other odd devices, mobile applications, code reviews, and web application assessments. So we had this one opportunity where a former federal employee was CISO for this bank, and he had a law enforcement background, counterintelligence, supply chain. So he understood the threats of introducing new technology into his organization. And when he got these new ATM machines, he saw that just like any other system, they're computers. They run Windows operating systems. They're connected into the network, and there are a lot of moving parts. So that's when he asked Polito, because we specialize in that type of technology and that type of assessment, see if we can find any vulnerabilities in that system. And so that's how we got started with that. But Peter, who is with Polito for years now, he helped put together our slides and presentation. And so I'll just introduce it, Peter.
Great, thanks, Fred. Hi, everyone. So my name is Peter Quach. I'm a project manager at Polito. And like Fred said, I'm going to go through our slides with you today, titled "We Hacked an ATM and Dispensed All of the Cash." So, like Fred said, we were hired for this, so this was legal, of course. And first, it is quite a bit easier than you think to hack an ATM. So one, you just need kind of one of these guys, right? But in all seriousness, let's talk about who we are today. So Polito is a cybersecurity firm. We're a boutique firm that specializes in several services we'll go over in just a little bit. We'll talk a little bit about our capabilities and why someone like this bank would want to hire us. And then we're going to go into specifically the ATM assessment methodology, the testing phases that we tailor fit for this assessment, as well as the overall recommendations and takeaways. So Polito, like Fred said, we started about 7-8 years ago. We're a cybersecurity company with, and our experts have over 50 years of combined experience in information security. We provide pretty extensive support to the federal government as well as commercial clients, and we do have quite a bit of proven track record of success in both public and the private sector. We also have TS SCI cleared employees for classified projects. So our mantra here is masterful cybersecurity. So what that means is that we believe our clients deserve the best solutions available, and that means tailoring unique solutions to fit their unique needs. So this is important in this particular example because ATM testing is not a class you can take, right? There is no degree on how to do this, right? So when a client comes to us and presents us with a unique scenario like testing an ATM, we have to create a custom solution for them. And because we have a team of well-rounded experts, this is something that we're able to do. So let's talk about a few of our services. And as we go through this, I'm going to highlight the services that we used on this assessment in particular. So a cyber readiness assessment. In this ATM assessment, we particularly focus on a vulnerability assessment to test the network vulnerabilities. Penetration testing, in particular, a web app and a mobile app. We also, while we did not do incident response on this assessment, we provided incident response advice to this client. So in the event an ATM was hacked, these are the steps that we recommend that you take. So that's the advice that we provided in terms of incident response on this assessment. We also did configuration reviews. So there were, when a bank gets an ATM, it's quite an endeavor. It's not like Fred was saying earlier, it is a computer. It's not just a standalone system. So there were servers and other appliances that we were checking configuration on. There was also, because the ATM is running on its own network, there was a security architecture review as well. We also did a source code review when we were doing the web and mobile app testing. And we found some pretty interesting findings there. We'll talk about in a little bit. And then, this is a bank that was already in business. They already have their own security policies in place. However, we did give them some recommendations with this new type of ATM. In particular, we also, because we do have quite a bit of experience in security for retail as well, we gave them some advice on even just opening and closing procedures for the branches, just things that the employees need to check for from a physical security standpoint for the ATMs. All right, so moving on to assessment methodology. So our assessment methodology for this is broken down into 5 main categories. The first one is information gathering. So the first thing we did is we met with this client who's planning on deploying this new type of ATM. For this particular client, they had originally purchased a few ATMs, and then their plan was to slowly roll them out. And they were buying 2 types. They were buying a regular ATM in the branch, and then they were buying a drive-through type as well from the same manufacturer. And then, so during this phase, we also determined the testing parameters. And we also met with the ATM manufacturer as well as their local servicing partner. So the manufacturer of the ATM was well aware of our testing. They did not hire us, though. This was purely paid for by the bank themselves. And the ATM company, like most ATM companies, they have a servicing provider that actually goes around and maintains and installs these ATMs. So they were part of the test as well. So they were also well aware of our testing. So discovery. So in this phase, we did reconnaissance and research on the new ATM model. We also did some research on general ATM hacking. There's not a lot of concrete information out there regarding ATM hacking, especially for this new type of ATM. There's quite a bit of info on more outdated models. So for this new type, like I had mentioned before, we really had to tailor and customize and really create this ATM testing methodology for this client. So during this part, we also manually crawled all the ATM applications. So this would be the computer applications, and in this case, there were accompanying mobile applications as well. Next, we moved to automated scanning. So we use industry standard tools, both open source and commercial tools like Nmap and Nessus for network scanning. We also use things like Burp Suite for web app testing as well. So that's what we did during that phase. Next, we move on to manual analysis and exploitation. So we don't like to just scan and print a report. We really don't feel that's doing the client any justice or any service at all. So it's really important once you get these vulnerabilities, once you have an idea of what your vulnerabilities may be, you want to manually check them and also validate to make sure you don't have any false positives and that you don't send your client chasing down a rabbit hole. In this case, there was also a Android app that went along with this ATM. We were able to decompile it and find some interesting information in there. Next is reporting. So we sent the raw tool output as well as our notes to the client. We always make that available, and then the final report as well. So this presentation that we're going through right now is actually a redacted or a sanitized copy of the outbrief presentation we gave to this client in addition to the report. So what you're seeing is actually everything except for the details that the client saw. However, for the client security and also for the manufacturers, all the images that you see in this presentation, all the names, all of that has been taken out. The images that you see are more generic images. Some of them that are actual screenshots or images that we took during the testing, I'll point those out. All right, so testing phases. So the first phase of testing was physical testing. ATMs are unique, right? They're most of the time just kind of left on their own, sometimes in the middle of nowhere. A lot of times they have 24/7 access really so they can serve their clients. The problem with that is it presents a huge security issue and a huge attack surface for a bank. So like most ATMs, or like most banks, there are just not enough people nor money to have active eyes on monitoring every single ATM at all times. So physical security is one of the first things that a bank needs to look at. So in this case, the first thing we looked at was very obvious. It was the key. So there was a lock on the front of the ATM and another lock on the back of the ATM. So we took a look at the physical enclosure, did a little Googling. In about, I want to say maybe 15 seconds or less, we found a key that would work for the ATM. Cost about $12.30 plus shipping. Shipping actually ended up costing more than the key, which was kind of ridiculous. But in any case, the key was the default factory key, and it worked for both the front and the back of the ATM. Essentially, we didn't even have to pick the lock or buy anything, or buy any lockpick set or do anything too far-fetched. The key was ready for purchase. So basically, that manufacturer is shipping keys with the default key for all their ATMs. Physical device testing continued. So front bezel, you'll see on different ATM models. A lot of times they're just held on with regular screws. In the example that we tested, it was just held on with standard Phillips head screws. So we were able to remove them rather quickly. For this client, we actually recommended they use a different type of screw where basically you can only use it one time. Additionally, there do not appear, or there were not any sensors or any type of alarms that would trigger if someone tried to remove a panel or tried to tamper with any type of panel or anything like that. Next, the hardware and USB issues. So USB human interface device support. The ATM, because it's just running Windows 7 and is just a computer, the USB ports were not locked down. And they were basically accepting inputs from any standard USB human interface device. So the first thing we connected was, like most people, a keyboard and mouse, and we were able to control the computer at that point. Additionally, Auto Connect was turned on. So once we plugged in a device, Windows just went ahead and installed it for us. So this is an example scenario of what could happen. So someone could potentially have the ATM key or remove the front bezel to gain access. They could then find a USB port. They could attach a USB mass storage device like a hard drive or a thumb drive and dump the contents. They can attach a networking appliance to it, any type of human interface device like a keyboard, mouse. And the scarier thing is that, you know, with this type, with what we did and what this vulnerability that a lot of ATMs have, someone could just close the ATM back up, and you know, everyone, you know, a lot of times these days people are checking ATMs or their devices looking for skimmers and other extra devices, but you can't check the inside of the ATM. So that's pretty scary. Now, once connected to the USB ports, or once someone has access, they also can now control the touchscreen digitizer. And like most ATMs nowadays, there's going to be a touchscreen. You're going to see a camera. There's going to be a keypad, some sort of cash dispensing unit. Some ATMs that are more sophisticated now have fingerprint sensors, RFID sensors, things like that. Now, when we booted up the ATM, we noticed that the BIOS was accessible during boot, and there was also no password on there. So that's a pretty simple fix, but once again, it was not done. There was also no secure boot sequence, there was also no secure boot. So we were able to change the sequence, and basically we were able to use an external thumb drive and boot into another operating system. Like I had said earlier, we sanitized this presentation. So this picture, although we did not take this picture, this is essentially almost an identical image to what we saw when we loaded Kali Linux onto the ATM we tested. So once we were in Kali Linux, we were able to see that the hard drives were not encrypted. You know, with just a few simple commands, we were able to look at the folders that were on the hard drive, and then we could dump the hard drive at that point. So operating system vulnerabilities. So administrative access was on by default. There's no password required to log into the operating system. The operating system was running a 32 version of Windows 7. And another issue that was that we discovered with this was more of a process issue. This manufacturer's timeline for pushing out updates was not immediate. It was not an immediate over-the-air type. It was a deliver by either flash drive or some sort of media. So someone physically had to go to each ATM to update it, basically. So running an older version of the operating system and then having to update to do quarterly and semi-annual updates, you know, there were several issues beyond just the ATM that were process issues that we identified as well. But anyways, back to OS vulnerabilities. There were also unpatched known vulnerabilities for this 32-bit version of Windows 7 that they were running. Here's a screenshot of the Windows firewall. So when we originally scanned the ATM, this was before the manufacturer had installed anything and before the servicing contractor had begun to do any maintenance on it. So we noticed that at that point, the firewall had everything, all the ports blocked. And this was likely just their default setting before they shipped it. So the second time we scanned it a couple weeks later, this was after the servicing company had started setting it up, after the manufacturer had started to get involved, and we noticed that that only the VNC port was open. So this new ATM model, like many of the new ATM models, can communicate with a teller remotely, or a bank employee remotely. So there was an option to basically stream video. And then the third scan showed the firewall was turned off completely. Now the third scan happened basically after they said they were done. So we later asked them why the firewall was turned off after they were done with their service, and they basically said that that they turned it off because they couldn't get some stuff to work, and that's just not acceptable. So that's one of the reasons that this bank CISO had brought us in. Network penetration testing. So the exploited VNC viewer that I just mentioned, once connected to the client's network, we were able to remotely monitor the ATM screen. So we were actually in another part of the client's bank branch, and we were connected to their network. And once we were connected to the branch's network, we were able to pivot onto the ATM, and we were able to use VNC viewer just in Linux to view what the user was seeing on their screen. So we were seeing a mirror image of their screen. I can't show you guys the videos, but we were actually able to record videos of transactions happening. So this new type of ATM, like most ATMs, customers have to enter in some sort of personal identifiable information, PIN numbers, social security numbers, etc. So we were able to see all of this. We saw users withdrawing cash. We saw checks being deposited with full images of the check. We saw balance numbers, so we could see how much were in each account. For the web app penetration testing, we noticed several things when we were testing the web app. They're still using default Neil, I think someone came up with that.
Yeah, can someone mute, please? Whoever that is.
And we also noticed that they were still using default administrator password as well. There was also no encryption. HTTPS was not enforced. Everything was transmitted in clear text, including credentials. And keep in mind, this is the web app for the back end of the ATM, and everything is being transmitted in clear text with default admin passwords. There was also unpatched vulnerabilities on the web server, and for the password rules, they were not changed. They were left as default, which was to be as short as one character and did not require any sort of combination of upper and lowercase letters, numbers, and symbols. And there was also no expiration date for the password as well. For mobile app pen testing, there was an Android app that accompanied this ATM. We were able to decompile and review the Java classes. We found a hard-coded encryption key. We also found a hard-coded VNC password, and that hard-coded VNC password is how we were able to remotely watch what was happening on the ATM when people were using it. SQL databases storing unencrypted sensitive data, such as customer PII, check details, check images. So that's important because, even without spending the time to spy on someone's screen or some transaction someone's working on, if someone really wanted to just quickly get in, get out, once they have access to a USB port on that ATM, they can just dump the hard drive because the hard drive is not encrypted, right? So they can just dump the hard drive, and like this shows, the customer PII is there, check images, check details, and then they can go home and take care of it and sort through that later in their own free time. So our overall recommendations and takeaways for this client and for this ATM manufacturer. So first, have a locksmith change out the locks on the front panel of each ATM. So our recommendation, not only should each ATM have their own lock, each branch should have their own unique keys. And they should have a process in place so that whoever the key holders are at the branch, that there are checks and balances in place so that that only those key holders have the keys. And then during opening and closing procedures, someone is going out and checking where the screws are and the access panels to make sure that they haven't been tampered with. And then when the ATM needs servicing, the technician is required to get the unique key from the branch. One of the issues that we noticed was the servicing companies wanted to each have wanted to have a copy of the keys for each of the ATMs, but that presents an issue because now the servicing, if someone were to get a handle of all the keys from that servicing company, now they have all the keys to all the ATMs in that geographic area. So that was another requirement or another recommendation that we made, was that the servicer just has to get a key and he or she is just going to have to wait for that bank person to give it to them. Improve segmentation / firewalling. So we should not be able to hijack VNC from anywhere in the building. So segmentation would help with something like that. Enable a BIOS password so we can't go in and change the boot sequence and can't mess with BIOS settings at all, period. Implement application whitelisting. By being able to connect a USB device to the ATM, we're also able to run malware or run additional applications. Implementing application whitelisting would help prevent that. The ATM firewall needs to be back on and only open ports should be open. Updates are at that point were disk-based and were rolled out quarterly and semi-annually, which is really just too slow. If Windows releases an update, as soon as it is tested and ready to go, it really should be deployed ASAP. Especially banks, should not be waiting or hopefully shouldn't be waiting a quarter to half a year to do that update. But these are updates not just from Windows, right? These are from all the different applications that the bank may run, from the different vendors that or third-party software that it uses to connect to the network and everything. Also to negotiate with the vendor to see what items can be fixed. So, in reality, right, not everything is going to be fixed by the manufacturer. Some things are the way they are. I mean, they've already designed the ATM shape to be the way it is, and they've already built them, right? They can't change it at this point. However, some things they can change. So like we recommended they change out the locks. We recommended they add sensors in for the panels. We recommended they use different types of screws where if as soon as you remove it, it locks it out and it can't be used again. So these are little things that can be done physically. There were additional items that we recommended from a software standpoint, such as pushing out a newer version of Windows that is updated and doesn't have these known vulnerabilities and other items as well. Ultimately, though, because this client was looking to roll out these ATMs rather quickly, we actually recommended that they monitor, they just monitor their ATMs and they disable the VNC function for now until they can get a secure connection for that one, or until the ATM company can figure out a way to administer passwords without hard coding them. But those were our overall recommendations and takeaways from this project. Overall, I mean, it was a very fun project. Our team definitely had a very fun time, but more importantly, we definitely learned a lot, and our client learned a lot from this as well. And they've been able to take the information they learned from this test and apply it to some of their existing ATMs as well. So this has been pretty valuable for them, not just for their new ATMs, but for just their processes and their older ATMs as well. Before we kind of get into, well, actually, here's some contact info real quick, and then we'll kind of get into some Q&A. So to learn more about AppGuard, and Fred, feel free to jump in if you'd like to talk a little bit about how AppGuard can help in situations like this.
Sure. Yeah. So we also tested AppGuard recently. AppGuard has a enterprise version and also a private version. And what AppGuard will do is it can block the execution of malware or just random executables. It can also block USB access, block configuration changes, network access. And so a lot of the attacks that we're successful in running on this ATM, if AppGuard was installed, it would prevent that. And so that's just one more way that you can take control of these systems and start to lock things down, to limit your exposure to random attacks. So something to consider is that we tested one ATM at one bank, but you can be guaranteed that these same exact vulnerabilities are at multiple banks. And that's one of the reasons why we have to be so sensitive with the manufacturer and with the actual ATM, because having hard-coded passwords, that's something that really it's probably endemic to this ATM, but it also probably affects multiple ATMs. So it's it about that. Yeah, any questions?
Fred, if I could jump in there for a second, it's Neil. I think one of the things that I've learned from hearing you guys speak on this topic a couple times, at least in a couple conversations, is that, in my limited research on the ATM side of the house, and you guys articulated it really well in the beginning of your deck, but there's basically three major concerns for ATMs, right? There's the physical security, which obviously your cool video of the bulldozer banging into it is an easy one to do, but there's only so much you can put in place there. Then I'd say there's logical security, which is going to be for anyone who may or may not be aware, there's big challenges with technologies or people installing devices inside the ATMs, right? And then ultimately that can then bypass the systems or make the ATM, just spit out cash that doesn't belong to their account. And then there's, I think the third one is probably fraud. And then that's where they're doing some kind of skimming, off of other people's accounts. So I think the piece that I think is that is very interesting to people that may be on this call is that we have to assume that when we're talking about money or transactions, that the company, the enterprise, or the bank or the credit union, is doing everything that they can, to maintain the integrity of their network, right? To make sure that when my transactions flow back and forth, that the bank is mitigating the risk of my cash flow. What's an underlying challenge there with the ATM situation and in the I would say point of sale devices go this route as well, is that they're using a hardware that is not theirs, so it's out of scope for where their probably perimeter defense goes. And there's this space where AppGuard, when deployed across ATM machines and point of sale devices, will bridge the gap from where the bank actually lets go of its risk and assumes that someone else should be accountable for that. And just the ability to have AppGuard running on those devices, that a malware or some other type of skimming or some kind of fraud or some kind of executable is going to do something on a negative way, is a really good example of really just a paradigm shift that has to happen when people understand how these types of softwares work and the risks that they're actually mitigating, in these examples where the hardware meets the software meets the person on the endpoint. So
Awesome, great, thanks, Neil.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is fantastic. So I think we've got the chat, a couple chat questions coming in. They've been coming over to me. So the question was asked, how does AppGuard compare to NCR or SolidCare? Now, I'm not familiar with that tool. Are you guys familiar with that tool at all?
I haven't used NCR before, no. But
Okay.
I have used a lot of other endpoint systems like Carbon Black, Tanium, Mandiant's tools, and AppGuard is a little bit different from most endpoint security systems in that it actively blocks and configures and guards specific applications. So you can run things like browsers or email clients or whatever, but if those applications are guarded, then it protects, kind of like in a sandbox, protects those apps from accessing outside of their area.
Right, and I would say the differentiator for AppGuard, I think, compared to some other solutions that are out there, is it's very binary in that we prevent pre-exploitation and post-exploitation, and most cyber stacks that are out there today that are some form of AV plus an EDR, which AppGuard is neither one of those. They are focused on identifying and reacting to the post exploitation. So something bad happened. Let's identify it. Let's add that bad thing to a list and make sure that bad thing doesn't happen again, because now we know what that is. The metaphor that I've been using over the past few weeks has been, if the exercise is someone wants to steal your car, and you say there's no way you can steal my car, and then somebody breaks the window, gets into the car, and goes, "You're an idiot. I just stole your car." But they can't start the car. The car can't move. No matter what they try, they can't get the car to actually, start and go forward. That's a really good example, because as much as you may not want someone in your car for a couple of minutes being mad that they can't steal it, we have to accept that, in my example, bringing it back to this conversation, that every single infrastructure that's out there today is compromised. We're all working on compromised infrastructures in some way, shape, or form, and it's only a matter of time before somebody gets the opportunity, or something detonates, or something malicious happens. And so when that happens, we need to be prepared to, well, first we want to be as preventative as possible, because we'd like to reduce that from happening. And that's exactly what AppGuard does. AppGuard on the kill chain is so much farther forward than various other tools and where they sit in the kill chain. All right, so we've got one. So Fred, this is probably a good question for you. How would you compare AppGuard to whitelisting programs, whitelisting applications that you've used in the past?
Yeah, we've used AppBlock. We've used like AppBlocker to block execution. There's Bit9 was what was bought by Carbon Black, or Carbon Black bought Bit9. Similar type idea of whitelisting applications. What AppBlocker does is it takes it at a different level. It can block execution at the kernel level. For example, it can block the reading from memory from, if let's say you have malware that's successful at executing on your system, maybe through a browser exploit or something like that, and it's running. It won't be able to access memory from other guarded processes, so it won't be able to scrape passwords out of LSAS, those types of things. Whereas it's more than just blocking execution of unknown pieces of executables. It's at blocking at the process level.
Got it. And if any folks on the call would like to dig deeper into that conversation, we'd be more than happy to schedule a call and connect those dots about how what AppGuard does is a different approach than sandboxing, whitelisting, and a couple other solutions out there. But be more than happy to dig into that much deeper. All right, let me just make a quick check here and see if we have any more calls or any more questions. Sorry about that. So if anyone's got any additional questions, next question is, this is a good question. I like this question. So in this example that you ran us through, where you're working with a bank, for the vendors who have approved, or have the vendors that create the ATMs, that build them, have they approved the installation of AppGuard or anything you've done to the device, or does it violate something on their end as well?
So yeah, there is the manufacturer warranty. Whenever you buy something, they're not going to make changes that can affect the stability of the system. So any changes that you do make to it, you do have to do it in a test environment before pushing it to production. And some of the changes that we requested or that we recommended, our customer pushed back to the vendor and required that they make these changes as part of their acceptance of purchasing them and putting them in their environment. So this is just something that banks, if they're serious about fixing these vulnerabilities, that they're willing to actually push back on the vendor and make some of these changes.
Yeah, and just to add to that, that is also something that you'd want to chat with the servicing company about as well, because that's something that they would have to service and provide updates for,
Sure.
and like that on a regular basis.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Absolutely. Great. I'll just check here one more time to see if we got any final questions. It looks like we do not. Any closing words or thoughts from you guys about what people should be doing, or how? What's the one takeaway they could take away from this to say that this webinar I learned these things, but what's the one ask that they should do?
Sure. I think that anything that comes into your environment that you're plugging into a network that you're providing to customers needs to be vetted thoroughly, and ideally from a third-party independent vendor. So someone that doesn't have a vested interest in it being where it is. Someone that can take a critical look at not just the one part of it, but can look at the code, can decompile it if they need to, and configuration, and be able to make recommendations on how it can be better secured and better protected to reduce your risk.
Sure, that makes complete sense. So we had two follow-up questions come in as we were speaking there. The first question was, does somebody need to have a whitelisting program deployed if they have AppGuard running? I would say the answer to that is no, you do not, or would not. And then the other question was, how many ATMs is AppGuard running on right now? So we obviously, for security purposes, don't acknowledge which banks have AppGuard running on them, and which ATMs. But I can say that it is spread across the entire United States, and there's some that are global outside of the U.S. as well. So great questions, though. Really appreciate it. All right. Well, I think we're good here to wrap up. I'll give everyone 15 minutes of their day back. Again, just to highlight what I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, if you are interested in being a panelist, if you are interested in providing us with a topic that may be good to do in this quorum that we do once a month, we would love to hear about that. And we will be sending out the deck that is here to everybody who signed in. So thanks again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your week, everybody.
Thank you.